Hey, Walter Sorrells back with more tips for the knife maker. Today, not knives, guns. So in a previous video, I showed how to make a Kydex knife sheath. In this video, I'll use more or less the same basic techniques to make a pistol holster. Now, obviously, my videos are intended for knife makers, but there's a lot of crosstalk between gun enthusiasts and knife enthusiasts. And moreover, many of the technical skills used by knife makers transfer into the gun world and vice versa. And this happens to be a perfect instance of that. So some of you guys know that I'm a competition practical pistol shooter. So the holster that I'll be making today is an outside-the-waistband holster that can be used for concealed carry or for competition in IDPA, which is the discipline that I shoot. Kydex is great because first, it's fairly cheap and the tools that are required don't really cost all that much. But more importantly, pretty much anybody can make a really high quality holster without a ton of experience. Learning curve's not too long and it's really a lot of fun to do. If you haven't watched my knife sheath video, it'll give a few details about the techniques and tools that I may kind of gloss over here. But you don't necessarily need to watch it. In the event you'd like to though, click here. Okay, first, a little background on Kydex. Kydex is a trade name for a thermoplastic acrylic polyvinyl chloride, meaning that it's chemically related to the stuff they use to make PVC plumbing pipes with. Now, thermoplastics are plastics which can be heated up and formed or extruded or molded into a shape, and then when they cool, they hold that shape. Kydex is typically sold in sheet form, so you can heat it up and press it or fold it into shape. It comes in a variety of thicknesses and colors, generally with a textured side and a glossier slick side. So before I go any further, I should mention that I learned how to make these holsters from a friend of mine named Greg Gillis. Now, Greg is a real-life ninja kind of guy. He's a former SWAT commander, goes to Uzbekistan every few months to train military folks in how to shoot. I mean, he's really just one of the most talented, natural, pure shooters that I've ever shot with. He's also a great guy, too. Anyway, I have to thank him for being really generous in helping me learn how to make these holsters. For this project, we'll be using 0.08 inch thickness Kydex. It's typically available in 0.06, 0.08, and 0.09. I generally use the thinner 0.06 inch Kydex for knife sheaths, but you don't want to use that for holsters. Here's why. I made this about a year ago, used it in competition a couple times a week for about a year, and the belt loop just cracked right off. And I actually had to make a reinforcement on the inside of it right at the very beginning because it was just kind of loose and floppy. So stay away from the 0.06 stuff for holsters. As I said, Kydex is also available in 0.09 thickness, but I think most holster makers generally reserve that for belt loops and things like that, where rigidity is the most important quality. A good Kydex holster needs to be able to flex a little so the gun can go in and out smoothly, and 0.09 is just really hard. So the thing that makes Kydex so cool is that while it's quite hard, it's also springy. So you can make your gun kind of click into place, creating a holster with excellent retention features, but that's still easy to draw from. If you make it properly, your gun will never jog out of the holster during intense physical activity like running or falling, and yet there aren't any complex retention devices which can create barriers to access under stress. We'll show you in a little more detail what we mean as we go along. Alright, the main tool you'll need in order to make a holster is this, a Kydex press. You can buy them new or you can make them, as I did. The press is really quite simple. The only part of it that you can't just run down to Lowe's and buy is this foam. I bought mine from knifekits.com. I should mention that you can find a lot of these materials at many of the knife making supply places, but knifekits.com seems to kind of specialize in sheath and holster material, so they've got a pretty full line of rivets and rivet setters and arbor presses and Kydex presses and all kinds of stuff, so personally I'd check there first. Other than that, we'll need a heat gun, a drill, a Dremel tool, and some rivets. I also use a bandsaw and a belt grinder, but you don't need them. I'll actually be making two holsters today, one for my Glock 34 and one for my Glock 19, but mostly I'll just show the 34. I'll be using OD green Kydex. Now before messing with the Kydex itself, I'll need to prep my pistol. Of course, when working with firearms, the first thing to do is to make sure the gun's unloaded. The day you get complacent about that is the day you start shooting things you didn't mean to shoot. Once I've made sure the Glock's safe, I'll tape this rod to the top of the barrel. You could just use a piece of scrap steel or aluminum or a wooden dowel. It's not important. The reason for this is that you'll need to have a channel for your sights to travel through. If you skip this step, the Kydex will close in over the top of the slide and your front sight will snag inside the holster. Your gun might not even come out at all. I tape it side to side, then I run tape down the barrel. This keeps the rod from getting pushed out of place and throwing the sight channel off center. Now I'll cut out the basic form of the holster. It's basically symmetrical from side to side, except for a long tab extending up from the right side, which will be used to form the belt loop. I've made a fair number of these, but it's not like I make them every day, so I cut everything generously to make sure I don't screw up. You can always take material away, but you can't put it back. If you make a lot of these, you could tighten this up a lot and not waste so much material. The next step is to heat form the Kydex. Before we get to that though, I always lay out everything on the press, making dead sure that I know exactly what I'm intending to do and in what order. You're going to be moving really fast so the Kydex doesn't harden before everything's set up, so you want to know exactly what you're doing beforehand. Basically, you'll be hanging the grip of the gun outside the press, right where I've marked it, so that the edge of the Kydex is right even with the trigger guard. At this point you need to heat your Kydex. A lot of guys do it in toaster ovens. I actually use my heat treating oven because it's already sitting out here in my shop, preheated to 350 Fahrenheit. I use a little baking rack out of a toaster oven to position it inside the heat treating oven. You want to put it smooth side down on the baking rack. The textured side will form the outside of your sheath, and if you put it in with the textured side down and leave it in just a little too long, you can end up with impressions of the rack burning themselves into the texturing. So you don't want that to happen. Keep the smooth side down. You want the Kydex heated until it's floppy, sort of like cooked lasagna noodles. If you see the edges starting to roll up, you better get it out quick because it's about ready to burn. But that's about where you want it. As soon as it's ready, you pull it out, flip the Kydex over so the textured side is down because that's the part that you want outside the holster, and you quickly wrap it around your pistol, sort of like a taco. I wear Kevlar gloves. The Kydex is very hot and can burn you pretty nicely if you aren't careful. Now you want to kind of pull it taut around the gun, then close the press and clamp it down with a fair amount of pressure. Note that I put an empty magazine in the gun. It's probably overkill, but polymer frames are also a thermoplastic, and I don't want to squash my frame and warp the gun. There's probably not much chance of that, but it's just sort of a belt and suspenders thing that I do. Now leave it in the press for about 10 minutes. Thermoplastics have memory, meaning that if you don't let them cool completely, they'll start reverting to their original shape. So you can pull it out and think you've got everything perfect, and then it kind of eases back out of shape. So resist the temptation to pop it open and yank it out before it's ready. If it still feels warm, clamp it up again and leave it a few more minutes. So here we are. The Kydex should now have taken on the exact form of the gun. Just push the gun in and out to make sure everything fits properly. It should be pretty tight at this point. Now, by the way, if you aren't happy, the great thing about Kydex is you can always heat it up again. If you do it too many times, it'll start to lose some of the texturing, but you can take it in and out a couple or 3 times and be fine. It'll just flatten right back out in the oven, and you can repeat this process again until you get it right. Incidentally, my friend Greg actually showed me a slightly different process. The way he did it, he put a little wooden spacer under the barrel so that the Kydex has about a 1/2 inch gap between the two sides of the holster. This allows for the use of an adjustable spacer so that as your holster wears in, you can tighten it. Now, I've never found myself adjusting a holster, but I have had those adjustment screws back out in the middle of a match, and it's kind of a pain in the neck. So I replaced the adjustment feature with a simpler riveted approach. Doesn't hurt that it's easier and cheaper to make. The next step is to trim the excess. I use my belt grinder, but you can also use a cutoff wheel on a Dremel. As you'll quickly see, when you grind Kydex, it immediately turns to hot goo, so be careful, you can burn yourself. You can also over-grind pretty quickly. I grind the bottom of the holster roughly flush with the barrel, but some people let the barrel and even the end of the frame hang out. Nothing wrong with that. I also rebate the area around the ejection port. IDPA rules specify how far this cutout can extend from the breech face, but if you're not doing a competition holster, you can do it however you want. Make sure to leave excess material below the barrel, here. This is where the two sides of the holster will be fastened together with rivets. If you trim this area too small, you won't be able to fit your rivets and you'll have to trash the whole thing, so err on the side of caution. Not a bad idea to put the fasteners in and then trim it to final shape. Now, the whole key to this type of holster design is that the Kydex should sort of push down or sink down into the trigger guard. This forms a retention detent that gives it the positive click signaling proper retention. Just trim this detent area more or less to the edges of the trigger guard. If you did everything right, it's plenty rigid enough to hold your gun in the holster, but flexible enough to slip smoothly over the front of the trigger guard when you draw or reholster. Big point. Make sure you cover the entire trigger guard so that nothing can cause an inadvertent discharge of the gun. This is a really important safety feature. Let me say that again. Make sure to totally cover the trigger guard on both sides of the holster. If you don't, you're just asking to shoot yourself. The next step is to make the belt loop. I make this little form out of a piece of scrap wood. It fits perfectly into this notch where the trigger guard goes up into the frame. I wear a 1 3/4 inch belt, so my wood is just a hair larger than that. Of course, you'll want to make it fit whatever you typically wear. That's the cool thing about doing custom things for yourself, is you can tailor it to exactly your needs. Using a heat gun, I'll soften the holster here at the juncture between the belt loop and the body of the holster. Be very aware of where your heat's going. If you get too slap happy, your holster will lose its shape. You can also melt the texture off of it. So just enough heat to make it flexible. Anything beyond that is unnecessary. I'm wearing my Kevlar glove again and blocking the heat a little with the wood. That way the heat just goes where I want it. As soon as the Kydex softens, I bend it over the form and clamp it down. You can go forward cant or no cant depending on your taste. Once it's soft, I'll bend the bottom of the belt retaining loop over the wood form, like so. Now my friend Greg did this a little differently. He made two little tabs that extend off the ends of the loop and then bend under. They kind of bite into your pants and retain the holster slightly better than this approach. But this can be used inside the waist of your pants or behind your belt if you prefer, and is a little easier to do. So it's kind of 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Before it's all over, you'll want to burnish the edges of the holster, softening the corners of the plastic. I'm using a felt polishing attachment on my Dremel. I just very lightly burnish and soften the corners of every single edge on the holster. Kydex is quite hard, and if you don't soften these edges, your holster will basically be covered with tiny little knives that'll just cut the crap out of you whenever you draw your pistol. The rapidly turning polishing attachment on the Dremel will actually create so much heat that it'll melt the Kydex. And this is kind of part of the burnishing process, but it can get out of control and burn holes in your holster pretty easily. So you might want to experiment a little with some scrap Kydex to get a feel for how it works. A very light touch is the way to go. Next, we'll rivet the holster together. Some people also use a Kydex glue, but I see no point in that whatsoever. I'll mark 2 holes, then drill 2 1/4-inch holes on my drill press. I'll be using 1/4-inch rivets. You could also use screw sets like this, or smaller 3/16-inch rivets. It's just personal preference. Now, there are commercially available rivet setting gizmos, but being the perverse guy that I am, I had to fabricate my own on my lathe. You can find rivet setters at leather supply places and at places like knifekits.com. I set my little rivet setter up like so. Give the rivet setter a whack. And voila, the rivet is set. And here's the finished product. Here's what I did with my 19. This is Desert Tan. It's the same basic idea as the holster for my 34, but only one rivet because of the shorter barrel. Perfect for the new CCP division in IDPA. It would also be great for a detective or an armed citizen looking for an outside-the-waistband carry solution. Does it work? You be the judge. I made both of these holsters this afternoon and then used my 34 in competition this evening. I'm using it here as I shoot this variant of the collateral drill on stage 4. You had to whack the pool noodle, which was supposed to represent knocking an assailant's gun away, then put 2 shots from retention on target 1, then Mozambique the second target, freestyle. I short stroked my final shot, but still shot it in 2.19 seconds, 0 points down. I'll take it. Watch the movie Collateral and you'll see where the drill came from. Now here's me getting a cover penalty on the final stage of the night. The holster did better than I did. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, here are a couple of other videos that you might be interested in. Also, like me on Facebook at Walter Sorrells Blades, and check out my website, waltersorrellsblades.com, where you'll find examples of my work along with instructional videos showing all aspects of Japanese sword making, including forging and polishing, how to make hamones, and how to make fittings, scabbards, and handles for Japanese swords.